But then, yes, it's important because it has to do with people and relationships, and it's controversial because there are many people out there, and I don't know what situation you are in at the moment, or you might even know people that are facing the same thing, and many people who don't even know how to handle such situation. They of course are in that kind of situation, they of course are in those shoes, but they really do not know how to go about it. And this has become something that we have to deal with as a society. So what's that thing we want to talk about today? We want to talk about how to handle your preparation for divorce if you ever have to go through a divorce. But let me say, as a matter of policy, which I know of law accent, that it's important that divorce is the last thing that comes to mind. In essence, you should have been able to weigh the situation. You should have put in every effort to ensure that things are resolved before you start thinking about divorce. And why am I saying that? Or better still, why is it a policy for us at Law Accent? Now, over the years of our practice, we've seen situations of people that are products of broken marriages, products of broken homes, and we see how that gap, whether the gap of not having a mother within to raise the person, or the gap of not even having a father figure, we've seen how this affects people, how this affects children in their formative years, and we've seen how this also destabilizes unions and families, and eventually even also destabilizes generations to come. So we would usually advise that divorce should be the last thing on the mind. But if you have to do a divorce for a just cause, why not? For instance, we know the story of many people that are victims of domestic violence, victim of abuses, and you will definitely know that, look, to be alive, it's better to leave this unhealthy relationship. So we have that kind of situation, and we have justifiable situations where people just need to move on. So if you're in those shoes today, this conversation, of course, is meant for you. How will you, or what do you need to do to ensure that you are properly positioned for the journey towards filing a divorce suit? I have, well, so should I say 3 key points, or maybe 4? But very unique point. Let's start with them so that we are also managing time here. The first thing you have to do, well, which is what I've said, you should weigh everything. Be sure that the relationship has broken down irretrievably. That means that, look, this whole thing, there is nothing that can be done about it again. Be sure that you've put in every step, you've taken every step to cement that relationship. So that could include going for counseling, that could include a private session where you engage in conversation. It could include even engaging your religious leaders, people that you put in trust. It could even be family members as well. Ensure that you've put in all of these efforts and you know that it is in the best interest of everybody to move on. Now, once you've crossed that hurdle, the next thing you want to do is to then identify the subject matters that you own in common, if any. Subject matters that you own in common. So that could include money, because we're in a culture, we're in a society where, so loosely speaking, perhaps majority believe that it's good for the man and the woman to have things in common. So you see couples having money in common. You see couples even buying properties in common. In Mr. So, Mrs. So, but you see them owning all of these things in common. So you should identify, are there subject matters that you own in common? And guess what? Let me give you a shocker as well. One of those subject matters that you actually own in common should be the children. So you should identify, are there children in this union? Because it will also come to it, you need to know what provisions, what what provisions will you put in place to ensure that these subject matters are properly taken care of? So let's start with property, for instance. If you have property in common, you might want to ask how much did the other person invest and how much did I invest? Now, when you answer this question, it's easy for you to begin to plan yourself towards your escape, the exit strategy. Do you want to pay off the person, or you want the person to pay you to own? Now, these are things that you have to start doing. Unfortunately, we have people that are passing through the phase of divorce and are not handling it in a mature manner. And what do I mean by this? Now, you can't say that you are preparing for divorce, for a divorce, and you are not willing to have conversation. Now, this is maturity. You need to sit down and face it, especially when you have children. There would be the need to sit down and address a lot of issues, and I'm coming to that pretty in a short while. So I was talking about just in case you have properties in common, you need to look at what's the splitting formula. Now, if you have money in common as well, you need to ask yourself, what's the splitting formula? You might even have business in common. So I know the story of a very prominent businessman, who I'm not going to mention the name, of course, but very prominent businessman, until the moment when that divorce happened. The world usually had this thought that that business was owned by the man, until divorce happened and the man had to be kicked out of the business. So these are very, very crucial, practical things that you need to sit down and address. And then you should also then look at the place of the children. If there are children, or if there is a child, what is the provision? So in provision, you're talking about custody. Who should the child be staying with? Who should be having access to the child? Should the child stay with the mother, while the father would have maybe the access and the custody during holidays? Should the mother have custody during holidays and then the father has the custody during the school period? Unfortunately, one of the realities we've seen is that people get so emotionally intense, they get so emotionally engrossed that they leave out the place of the best interest of the child. And what do I mean? You would see people that are emotionally hurt trying to get at the person they are trying to move on from, and then using the basis of what they are trying to do, using the child as the tool to get at that person. So let me give another example here. So let's assume that Mr. A has decided to move on from the union with Mrs. B. Yes. Now, Mr. A and Mrs. B, they have a daughter in common. Now, this daughter is just 7 years old. This daughter is in her formative years. Mr. A knows that every other thing is bad with Mrs. B, but she is not a bad mother. But Mr. A, because of the emotional hurt and maybe any other reason, maybe Mrs. B is the well-to-do financially and has not been taking good care of Mr. A, or Mr. A is beginning to feel inferior in the union for not being able to play the role as the father and the man of the house. So Mr. A may then begin to demand for custody for no other reason than the fact that he is trying to get at Mrs. B. And these are things that we've seen happen a whole lot. So what's the advice from this side, from this hand on in today's conversation, is that divorce is something that should be handled as much as possible without any element of too much emotions that overrides the welfare of the children, and also overrides the need for you to remember that there is life even after that union. And unfortunately, when people decide to try to get back at their spouses that they are moving on from, eventually what happens is they find it difficult to move on because they keep holding on to something that is within the past, which they claim they want to leave, but yet are holding on to for too much. And these things we are discussing today, they are practical things we see when we're in court, things we handle as lawyers, and this is why we're also excited to have this conversation with you. So don't be that person. You should be as professional as possible. Understand, or better still, sit and ask yourself, what is the best interest of this child? What is the best interest of these children? If you know that you are a very, very busy person, and you know there is nothing wrong with the children staying with this person you are moving away, moving on from, I do not think, or better still, I would just say, consider it well, and then you may just want to go for access, which would mean that the children should be with you during holiday or some other arrangement. So these are practical things that you may want to do. What other thing? Of course, you need to also talk about maintenance. You need to talk about contributions. Interestingly, under Nigerian law, in as much as tradition makes it sound like the man is the one that must provide for the family, the law, the Child's Rights Act, is to the effect that everybody, so now let me not say everybody, the wife and the father, they are both responsible. And actually, not even just that they are both responsible, it is to the effect that whoever has is who the law will impose obligations on. So if it's obvious that the woman is the most well-to-do, there is nothing like the father must be the one to pay the children's school fee. And these are very practical things that are actually also the law. So you may want to begin to look at all of these things and then begin to see how to plan yourself towards ensuring that you have a smooth ride. And I hope that that person you are also trying to move on from would have access to this kind of resource, this kind of video conversation, so that the right mind is formed, so that the mind is clear early enough, and so that both of you can have a smooth ride towards the divorce proceeding. Because if you ask me, why does divorce take forever in court? One of the reasons is because is either one party alone prepared to go through the process, or both parties did not even prepare at all, which is again why we are having this conversation. So these are some of the very crucial, cogent things that you need to sit down and begin to look at and plan towards, so that everything can be properly sorted, and then you can have a smooth ride when you get to the court of law, to do every other thing for everybody to move on their separate ways. And then ask me, so what if you refuse to do these things that we are talking about today? Well, I'll just share this story with you. I once had a court matter that I did, and the judge had initially encouraged parties to resolve. And the judge mentioned his own reasoning that, look, if you people leave this case to me to decide, if I decide in favor of A, this is a social impact it will have, not just on B, but generally. If I decide in favor of B, this is the social impact it will have, not just on A, but generally. So the judge encouraged us to go and resolve things amicably, so that he doesn't have to make a decision, which is not just about the parties before him, but something that, of course, is going to affect the generality of people. And it could even become even people that are yet unborn. And this is the case as well. Answering the question, what happens if I do not do all of these things? It just would mean that you will be leaving a lot of things to the hands of the judge to decide. And in making those decisions, it's not just about the effect on you, it's also about the effect, perhaps we call it the unintended consequences, on many people that also surround that subject matter. These many people could include your family members, it can include even your colleagues at work, it can even include the children of the union. And I call them unintended because you may not have averse your mind to the effect of leaving these subjects. So again, my point is, you should invest, if possible, together with this other person that you are moving on from. Both of you should sit down and invest quality time to discuss these topical issues and agree